first step in testing a backflow prevention device is to identify the device. There are 3 testable devices, so it's important to identify the device that you are working on. This is a reduced pressure principal backflow prevention device, also known as an RPZ. It has 2 check valves, check valve number 1, check valve number 2, and it has a relief valve. The next step is to determine direction of flow. We always test in the direction of flow from the inlet to the outlet. Note the direction of flow by the arrow on the device. The next step is to number our test cocks. Test cock number 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the direction of flow. Test cock number 1 is located on the upstream side of the upstream shutoff valve. Another way of looking at it is the arrow points to test cock number 4. Next step is to install the adapters. This is the adapter for this device. After installing the adapter, you need to flush the test cocks to remove any debris from the test cocks, and also to eliminate the possibility of introducing any debris or foreign material into your test kit. You want to open up test cock number 4 first to create a flow through this device. As water is flowing through this device, the relief valve will not open. Open test cock number 3 and continue to allow it to flow. Test cock number 2. Test cock number 1. Close test cock number 1, 2, 3, and 4. By bleeding this way, you will prevent any premature discharge from the relief valve. The next step in testing a reduced pressure zone backflow prevention device is to shut down the downstream shutoff valve. After shutting down the downstream shutoff valve, you should observe to see if there's any water discharging out of the relief valve. If water is discharging out of the relief valve, that's an indication that the first check valve is not holding tight and the test is over. If no water is discharging out of the relief valve, the first check valve is considered tight and you can continue on with the test. To measure for back pressure, connect a standard PSI gauge to test cock number 1 and record the reading. Next, remove the pressure gauge from test cock number 1 and connect it to test cock number 4. Record the PSI reading. If the pressure reading on test cock number 1 is higher than the pressure reading on test cock number 4, continue with the test. If the pressure reading on test cock number 1 is lower than the pressure reading on test cock number 4, the downstream shutoff valve is leaking with back pressure. Resolve the back pressure condition before continuing with the test. In testing this backflow prevention device, we are going to test the first check valve differential pressure. We are going to test the second check valve for tightness against back pressure and differential pressure. And we're going to test the opening point of the relief valve. All tests are done under a no-flow condition. To test this backflow prevention device, we will use a 3-valve differential test kit. This test kit measures differential pressure and reads from 0 to 15 psid. At the start of the test, the high control valve is closed, the low control valve is closed, and the vent control valve is open. To measure the differential pressure across the first check valve, we need to take the high hose and connect it to test cock number 2. The vent hose should be in the bucket. Open test cock number 2. Take the low hose, connect it to test cock number 3. Open test cock number 3. After opening up the test cocks, bleed the air out of the test kit by opening the high control valve and then closing the high control valve, by opening the low control valve and then closing the low control valve. Take your differential pressure reading. It should be 5 or greater. To test the second check valve for tightness, we want to back pressure the second check valve. We want to bring water from test cock number 2 to test cock number 4. To do so, take the vent hose, bleed out the air by opening up the low side. Connect the vent hose to test cock number 4. Open test cock number 4. To introduce water into test cock number 4 from test cock number 2, we need to open up the high control valve. With the high control valve open, water is now flowing from test cock number 2 up and around through the vent hose to test cock number 4. Observe the relief valve port. If there's no discharge out of the relief valve, that's indicating that the second check valve is holding tight under a back pressure condition. All tests are done under a no-flow condition. This is not a test for the downstream shutoff valve. It is a test to determine whether this device is in a no-flow condition. To determine that this device is in a no-flow condition, we need to stop the flow of water to our test kit. With the vent hose connected to test cock number 4 and the high side connected to test cock number 2, water is now flowing from test cock number 2 to test cock number 4 through our test kit. We need to stop the flow of water to our test kit. The high side control hose is connected to the bottom side of that test kit. To stop the flow of water to our test kit, we need to close down test cock number 2. Observe the gauge reading. The gauge should hold steady. With the high control valve open, supplying water to test cock number 4, and the water shut off to the gauge, and the gauge holding steady, this is an indication that the device is in a no-flow condition. To test the opening point of the relief valve, we need to introduce water into test cock number 3. To do so, we need to open up test cock number 2. After opening up test cock number 2, we can now introduce water into test cock number 3 by opening up the low control valve. 1/4 turn. Observe the relief valve vent port. When water starts to discharge from the vent port, take the gauge reading. The gauge is now reading the differential pressure opening point of the relief valve. It should be 2 psid or greater. To test the differential pressure of the second check valve, close down test cocks and remove the hoses. Reorientate your control valves on your test kit. The high control valve is closed, the low control valve is closed, and the vent is open. To measure the differential pressure across the second check valve, connect the high hose to test cock number 3 and open up the test cock. Connect the low hose to test cock number 4 and open up the test cock. Lead the air out of the test kit by opening the high control valve and then closing it, by opening the low control valve and then closing it. Take your differential pressure reading. The differential pressure reading should be 1 or greater. This concludes the test of a reduced pressure zone backflow prevention device assembly. Remove the hoses. Restore the device to service. To test the downstream shutoff valve for tightness, conduct a no-flow test of the device. Create a demand by opening a valve downstream of the device. Watch for any flow from the open valve and observe the test kit needle. If there is no flow and the test kit needle is holding steady, the downstream shutoff valve is considered tight. If there is a flow and the needle drops to 0, the downstream shutoff valve is considered leaking.